the CIA is obviously they took steps to investigate themselves, and the Inspector General. I think what's important to note here is that the CIA's own Inspector General said, "Hey, this was wrong." Hey, I'm Jason Leopold. I'm an investigative reporter at Vice News. Last week, I published a very lengthy investigative report how a Google search made the CIA spy on the Senate. And I'm here on the line and ready to take your questions.
Hey, Jason, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you, Michael.
We got a bunch of people who want to talk to you, and we're going to start with Peter. Let's say to Peter.
Hey, Peter, how are you?
Hi, good, Jason. Nice to meet you.
You as well. Thanks for taking the time.
So my first question is deals more with just sort of process and, the story behind the story. And so I'm just sort of interested in how you even learned that these documents existed in the first place, how the story, and just sort of, what was the thread that led to the unraveling of what resulted in such a lengthy and serious and long piece of journalism.
Yeah, it's definitely a lengthy story. So thank you for taking the time to read it. And that's a great question. Last March in 2014, Senator Dianne Feinstein gave an extraordinary floor speech on the Senate floor. She said that the CIA had spied on the Senate Intelligence Committee, which she is the chairwoman of, while the committee's staffers were conducting a review and writing a report about the CIA's torture program. She talked about how this spying violated an agreement that the Senate Intelligence Committee entered into in 2009 with the CIA that would allow them to access millions of pages of CIA documents about the torture program. She rattled off a number of different letters, dates, and various agreements. After she gave that speech, it was obviously I wanted to learn more about what was happening, but it was very difficult to get anyone to discuss it on the record. The next best thing to do is to try to get the documents, if any existed, to see if we can, learn more about what was taking place behind the scenes. So along with a doctoral student over at MIT named Ryan Shapiro, who I've done a number of Freedom of Information Act lawsuits with, we together filed a Freedom of Information Act request with the CIA, asking for any and all records that they have about the spying, about what was, what Dianne Feinstein had discussed. Any emails, letters, what took place behind the scenes between the Senate Intelligence Committee and the CIA that would shed light on this. So we filed that request. We were pretty aware that the CIA would not respond in the time frame that they should. So we moved to file a lawsuit. And it took a year to actually get these records. And just about a month ago, we obtained hundreds of pages of documents, and these documents do lend credibility and significant weight to everything that Dianne Feinstein and many other members of the Intelligence Committee had said about what the CIA did. It undercuts the CIA's own narrative about it. So, this story is a story that is heavily based on documents. And one of the difficult things was to actually put together a narrative. It was challenging, I should say, very challenging to put together a narrative based on documents. But I would not have been able to obtain the same information if it wasn't for the fact that we obtained these records.
Interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
And then, so my other question, it just sort of has to do with sort of the implications and the fallout of these disclosures and this persuasive corroborating evidence to what Feinstein had said had occurred, and it seems like nothing is going to change. That John Brennan, if he didn't perjure himself before Congress, he came awfully darn close. And I mean, just comparatively, and he still has his job. He still is a very, very powerful person in this country and in the executive branch. And you just compare that to the likes of Barry Bonds, who only avoided prison for perjuring himself ostensibly in Congress because his case got thrown out on appeal. And so it just seems like I'm just interested in any perspective you have on what sort of fallout implications, whether anything will happen to Brennan, given sort of what these revelations show just about this culture of disrespect between the branches of government.
Yeah, again, that's really important. I'm glad that you noted that. The fact is that there has not been any accountability for these actions. In fact, Senator Dianne Feinstein, when she weighed in on this story and on these documents and what they reveal, she noted as well that there has been a lack of accountability. She's disappointed that the CIA has not held anyone accountable for the actions or the actions of its officers, officers who were involved with the intrusion into Senate computers. I mean, the reality is that no, there will not be accountability. I don't expect that will happen. I think Brennan is certainly safe in his position. President Obama had expressed support for John Brennan, and other members of Congress are still sort of expecting a written apology or an apology of some sort. I mean, the relationship between the CIA and certain members of the Intelligence Committee is still somewhat chilled as a result of this. I mean, just a couple of months ago, Senator Ron Wyden, wrote to John Brennan and said, "You still owe an apology for the spying and hacking of Senate computers." Brennan has not responded yet, and Senator Wyden wanted Brennan to promise that this would never happen again. So right now, all you have is just an exchange of letters. Despite that, however, it's still really important for the public record, for the historical record, to have this there. And ultimately, the Justice Department was involved. The Justice Department took a look at this. We have a letter from the Justice Department where they declined to prosecute. They said there was insufficient evidence. The form of accountability that you're talking about, in comparison to sort of some more high-profile figures like Barry Bonds, that's just not going to happen. I mean, that's just not something you will see.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Hey, Peter, thank you for coming on. Jason, we've got a couple more people on Skype, but first I wanted to take a look at this tweet that we got from Joseph Cox, who wants to know, when you appeal a FOIA request that's been denied, what strategies do you use to convince the agency to release documents or reconsider the request? Is there some grand strategy, or what do you do?
These are great questions. With regard to appeals of FOIAs, I mean, I think that there is this belief that you have to put together some sort of legal argument. That's not the case. Generally, what I do in my appeals is when I file appeals, is I try to make a case for why the records are in the public interest, why these records should be released. There are certain instances when I appeal to the FBI, and I just say, I appeal all of the withholdings, period. Or I appeal the integrity of the search, go back and search again. But in some of the more high-profile FOIA requests that I file, at least at the appeal stage, I really go out of my way to try and demonstrate why these records should be released. And I think that's that's important. It's proven to be beneficial. It's resulted in the release of records. So In doing so, it may mean doing a Google search, trying to find all of the information that may already be out there to show that this information that I'm seeking, or the documents that I'm seeking, no longer need to remain secret.
All right. Well, thanks for the question, Joseph. I hope that was a good answer for you.
Thank you, Joseph.
Jason, you ready to talk to your next Skype caller?
Let's do it.
Let's say hey to Anna then.
Hey there, how are you?
Great, how are you?
Doing well, thank you.
Thanks for having me on the line.
Thanks for being here. What's your question?
I wanted to go back to this issue of an apology. To me, that seems like kind of just a slap on the wrist, frankly, for what is kind of a gross violation of the system of checks and balances. Is just, okay, we want an apology or a promise. But I was wondering if you have any ideas about what actions Brennan or the CIA as a whole could take to restore the relationship, not just with the Senate, but with the American public, and to kind of be a little bit more persuasive in saying that this will not happen again, or this isn't even happening right now.
Sure. That's a good question. I think that with the American public, that's a far more complex issue. And the CIA is involved in all sorts of covert activities, intelligence activities, and the public certainly is very skeptical of anything that the CIA says. Certainly even an apology. Does it carry any weight? So I think that how the CIA can restore trust with the public is just difficult and perhaps part of a larger discussion. With regard to the apology that the Senate wanted from the CIA, and as you read the story, John Brennan actually wrote an apology letter. There was a draft apology letter in there that the CIA mistakenly turned over to us here at Vice News, and then requested that we refrain from posting this, which we obviously declined to do. But the letter of apology was certainly important for senators, and I understand why, because it's something that they wanted to have on the record. It was part of the record. Here's an official apology, and it meant something to them. There was part of it was a little bit personal, because the CIA had referred some Senate staffers for prosecution based on the fact that they claimed that Senate staffers exploited a loophole or a tool on the computer network that allowed them to gain access to documents that they weren't allowed to see. It turned out that was that the information that was based on was completely inaccurate. So there was no accountability for that at all. And the CIA is obviously they took steps to investigate themselves. And the Inspector General, I think what's important to note here is that the CIA's own Inspector General said, hey, this was wrong. And that's what John Brennan's apology letter was about. This was wrong. The CIA officers and tech employees should not have done this. They violated an agreement. And you, John Brennan, should figure out how you intend to hold them accountable. And what John Brennan ultimately did is he took a course of action that, as I note in the story, continues to cause strife with the Intelligence Committee. And he basically stood up an accountability review board that completely overturned everything that the CIA's own internal watchdog found and absolved everyone. So there was actually a moment where there would have been more than a slap on the wrist, perhaps. But ultimately, it was the CIA that investigated itself and absolved itself as well.
So why do you think Brennan decided just to leave the letter as a draft and not to send it, just to kind of absolve himself of that accountability?
That's something I've been trying to figure out, actually. And the explanation from the CIA is that John Brennan decided to apologize in person to Senator Dianne Feinstein and the ranking minority member Saxby Chambliss. So he didn't need to write a letter, But this was important for other members, as I noted, because they want to have it on the record, and in addition, because the CIA had wrongly referred Senate staffers they filed a criminal referral with the Justice Department. So their explanation, the CIA's official on the record explanation is, oh, Brennan did apologize, but he did it in person. The letter that he ultimately did send to the committee, to Dianne Feinstein and Saxby Chambliss, was strikingly different in tone than the one that that had been a draft. And I'm unsure at this point whether he may have had discussions with the White House, perhaps, who was aware of what was happening. Perhaps they talked him out of it, or someone talked him out of actually going forward with it, or maybe he looked at it and said, this is not something I want to put down on the record. But that's a lingering question. It's one that remains unanswered, that I hope to get some more answers to in the future.
It's interesting as well because it seems like a written apology might reach a wider audience than only apologizing to 2 or 3 specific people, because I think an apology is deserved by a wider group than that as well.
Yeah, that's actually what I heard from some of some of the Senate staffers, is that the apology that he gave was only to Dianne Feinstein and Saxby Chambliss, but it didn't include anyone else. It didn't include any of the staffers. Nobody else was present. And so it really didn't mean anything. Dianne Feinstein noted that she was very appreciative that, to receive the apology, but other people who are obviously involved in this and saw themselves being referred for a criminal referral being filed by the CIA were disappointed, because there was nothing there that sort of demonstrated that he was apologizing to the entire committee itself.
Sure. Well, thank you. I just have one more question.
Sure.
I was wondering if the Senate ever apologized for breaking the common understanding by removing the Panetta Review documents.
No, actually, that's another good question. So obviously, there was an agreement that the Senate Intelligence Committee, the staffers would run documents by the CIA before they removed them from the building. And so this Panetta Review, which is the internal CIA report on its own torture program, which apparently is harshly critical of the program itself. That's what ultimately led to the spying, the Google search that the staffers conducted, in which they found this report. And when they found it, they copied it and removed it, and no one knew about it because they brought it to the Senate building. But their justification for doing that was that the CIA sort of has a history of destroying documents and evidence, and ultimately what led to this, to the Senate's own investigation, was the destruction of torture tapes, or interrogation videotapes, if you will. Interrogation tapes that one of which showed a detainee being waterboarded, and that's how they ended up here. But as far as I know, there was no real apology. There was more of a justification for removing it from the building.
Okay. Thank you so much. That was really interesting.
Thank you. I appreciate you taking the time again to read the story.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for coming on. So, Jason, we got one more person on Skype for you, and a couple more tweets. But let's say hey to Mark, who's calling us from Brooklyn.
Hey there, Mark. How are you?
Well, thanks, Jason. How are you? Thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, thank you.
So one of the things you mentioned earlier was the Freedom of Information Act, or FOIA request.
Yes.
And you mentioned that you've been working with a fellow on doing these sorts of things. As it seems there's a trend to keep things not necessarily from the public, but maybe overclassification, we might say. Do you think that FOIA is a very important tool in the journalist's arsenal these days?
I would say it's the most important tool in my arsenal, and I think that it's essential for democracy that that this law works. Unfortunately, it doesn't work the way it should. I think that you're starting to see, say over the past year, a rapid increase in the use of FOIA by journalists to obtain information because of the fact that, or because the government itself is so highly secretive. Overclassification is a huge problem. In fact, with the Hillary Clinton emails, I'm sure as you heard, the fact that she may have had some classified information in her emails that were sent or that she received on an unsecured server And the intelligence community, Inspector General, who weighed in on this and did a sample review of some of these emails, what's not really been discussed is that this is a government official who pretty much believes that overclassification, does not exist, that it's, not an issue. But it is. It's one of the reasons why it's so difficult to obviously obtain documents and obtain certain records from various government agencies. But this story, as I noted, it's really based on FOIA, and part of that was being incredibly patient and having also an incredible attorney. And we have an attorney who represents us, Jeffrey Light. He's a FOIA attorney in D.C. and we've been so fortunate to have these successes with FOIA. But part of it also comes from using it regularly, using it aggressively, and I think that we've demonstrated that we do that here.
Great. Now, it seems that the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence doesn't really have the same type of FOIA request that it can give to an executive branch agency. So could you speak to the relationship between those who are providing oversight on these executive branch agencies and the desire of these executive branch agencies to keep their activities hidden from their overseers?
That's true, by the way. And I recently testified before Congress about the Freedom of Information Act. And one of the things I noted that during that testimony that was if Congress ever wanted to make itself subject to FOIA, that I fully support that, and because they obviously are not, they've exempt themselves from FOIA. The relationship between the Senate and CIA, obviously, or at least the Intelligence Committee and the CIA. Dianne Feinstein noted that this breach, this intrusion, undermines separation of powers, constitutional framework related to oversight of intelligence activities. Basically, it's at least in terms of the transparency part, it's very difficult to get any information in the form of documents out of the Senate unless they decide to release it. What was really fascinating about this cache of records was that a bulk of it actually were letters from Congress, or from the Intelligence Committee to the CIA that were classified as top secret, secret, confidential, and they were just basically letters, sort of discussing what went on behind the scenes and disagreements. So I was really obviously very happy to get those letters, get them declassified. But to your question was essentially what is the oversight relationship like, or?
Well, you mentioned that this type of incident has strained the relationship
Yes.
between the CIA and the Intelligence Committee. And if the Intelligence Committees are supposed to give oversight, what does this kind of strained relationship imply for how much accountability there might be in the future?
Well, at least as it stands right now, we have a new chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, and this is Senator Richard Burr. And Richard Burr is a far different chairman than Dianne Feinstein. And he's actually gone on the record saying he wants all of the hearings to be held in secret. He doesn't think that there should be any public hearings related to intelligence, related to the CIA. He is certainly a lawmaker who is whose oversight I think should be called into question, because there seems to be too close of a relationship. He is also the one who wanted this so-called Panetta review that I discussed earlier returned to the CIA. So I think that sort of demonstrates what you can expect in terms of oversight now that the chairmanship changed hands. Dianne Feinstein was also very supportive of the CIA. One of the letters one of the internal emails that the that John Brennan sent to CIA staff actually noted that Dianne Feinstein. He was very complimentary of her. He said that Dianne Feinstein has been very supportive, but she also has asked some tough questions, and that was shown in many of these documents. So right now you're just going to see a far different approach to oversight than we've seen previously in the past 6 years, and people have been very, very critical of of Feinstein and the oversight, her own oversight activities. But as this torture report makes clear, and I think now that these documents show that there was a lot going on behind the scenes. I mean, she was performing far more oversight than we, the public, knew at the time.
And two more questions
Sure.
for you. One is, as a journalist, you that do such excellent reporting is able to get these stories that we, the American public, wouldn't know about if it were not for the diligence of the FOIA requests and the ability to distill these documents into something that we can digest. Do you have any concerns that legislation that wants to do restrictions on FOIA requests could preclude us as the public from knowing internal workings of government?
Absolutely. In fact, there was legislation, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it was in the National Defense Authorization Act, a provision in there that would have added further restrictions to FOIA, even add another FOIA exemption. One of the cyber security bill that was being discussed also had provisions that would have negatively impacted FOIA. So yes, I think that, and by the way, that obviously didn't fly and hasn't passed. But yes, I think that there, in the past year, we've seen Congress take some steps that one would further undermine and weaken the sort of spirit of what FOIA was all about. But at the same time, there have been hearings, as I mentioned. I was invited to one to testify about FOIA, in which members of Congress, discussed how they want to ensure that the agencies are abiding by the law and carrying out their duties. I think right now I'm less concerned about Congress and more concerned about the fact that all government agencies, for the most part, are terrible at FOIA. They're just not abiding by the guidelines that then Attorney General Eric Holder had issued back in 2009. So my beef, my fights are with these agencies and then the government attorneys. But at the same time, I do think that Congress could do more to strengthen FOIA and make it, ensure that these agencies are being as transparent as Obama said that they should be.
And finally, with recent issues we've seen with Hillary Clinton and the email classifications, whether or not the material was classified when it was received or stamps were removed, obviously a government official has different kind of standards than a normal citizen. But do you have any concerns as a journalist in some of the work that you're doing, excuse me, that you might be under some kind of monitoring, or do you have concerns that they may kick in your door like they may have done in the past to some journalists?
I don't have concerns that they'll kick in my door, to be honest with you, and maybe that's some people should say I should. I mean, certainly with regard to my communications, absolutely. I mean, I use encrypted emails. I mean, I have all this sort of wide range of encrypted communications, and that's how I communicate, certainly with when it comes to my work. But I think that's sort of the world we have to live in now, that we've learned so much over the past 5 years in terms of how easy it is to access our communications, how easy it is for emails to just sort of leak out. So I think that it's important to sort of operate that way. But with regard to dealing with the government agencies, I mean, I'm not fearful that suddenly my door is gonna be kicked down and someone's gonna take me off to a black site or something. Yeah, I feel pretty safe. I feel like I'd throw on some vinyl records and, we'd all hang out and, maybe I'd play Dead Kennedys or something and talk about government.
Great. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right. Mark, thanks for coming on. So, Jason, last question. We literally just got this in.
Great.
Has there ever been any major backlash from officials from the FOIA requests from your work? Or what did the CIA say, for example, about you publishing that letter?
Yeah, well, the CIA basically said that they did not want me to publish this letter. They did not. They were okay with me quoting from it. They did not want the letter to come out. This was an apology letter. This was a letter that John Brennan drafted, but didn't sign and he didn't send. And there was no national security information in there or anything that would hurt national security. This was simply to protect the agency perhaps from some embarrassment. And there was no basis to withhold it. I certainly could not do that. The letter was mistakenly turned over because under the Freedom of Information Act, this type of letter where it's in draft form could be withheld under what's known as the deliberative process. It's an exemption called the B5 exemption. And so the CIA could have withheld it. But the fact that they mistakenly turned it over was so much in and of itself a part of this story, a part of the larger story about what led the CIA to spy on the Senate. The Senate says they obtained a document known as the Panetta Review, the CIA's own internal review of its torture program, and they obtained it through a Google search. That these documents that I obtained, that Ryan Shapiro and I obtained, certainly show that, in fact, it was a misconfigured Google tool, Google search tool, that led the CIA, or rather that resulted in the Senate accessing documents that the CIA said was off limits. So the fact that it was mistakenly turned over, perhaps, even though the Senate would dispute that because they would claim that they have the authority to look at all of this, and at the same time that this document was turned over to us mistakenly, I think that was very much in and of itself a part of this story.
All right. Well, I hope that answered your question, Dee. Thanks for tweeting it in. Jason, that's the end of our show. Why don't you say goodbye to the folks at home?
This is great. Appreciate everyone taking the time to read this very lengthy report. And certainly if you have any other questions, you can catch me on Twitter, @JasonLeopold. And thanks again for being here. The Office of Net Assessment is the Pentagon's in-house think tank. Recently, they said that we'll give you some documents as long as you promise to never file a FOIA request again and don't have anyone else file a FOIA request.
How is that legal?
I don't know, but they put this in writing. And by the way, let me just say that should Congress want to make itself subject to FOIA, I fully support that.